These are all 261 quirks in My Hero Academia, and today I'll be explaining every single one. All quirks in the series are split into 4 categories: transformation, emitter, mutant, and accumulation. I'm going to cover each of these categories one by one, and at the end of each one, I'll reveal the strongest quirk in that category. The first category we'll be covering are transformation quirks. These quirks allow the users to temporarily change their body in some way. Sometimes their whole bodies, and sometimes only certain body parts. Let's kick off by covering all heroes who use transformation type quirks, and we'll later go through the villains. Start with Arbor quirk, which allows the user to transform parts of their bodies into wood. They can also create large tendrils of wood from their body parts and use them as a weapon. Due to wood's natural properties, this quirk is really ineffective against any fire-related attacks. It's used by the pro hero, Kamui Woods. Beast quirk, as the name suggests, allows the user to transform into a large monstrous beast. When transformed, the user's strength and speed increases significantly, and not even jolts of electricity are enough to phase them. However, the user seems to get weirdly enthusiastic when transformed, which can lead to some reckless decisions. It's used by Jirota from Class 1B. Big Fist makes the user's fist grow really large and also increases the user's strength proportionally. This allows the user to carry heavy objects, break anything in their way, or just throw super powerful punches. It's used by Itsuka from Class 1B. Black grants the user the ability to merge with anything that is dark colored. This includes all things that are naturally black, but can also include objects that are dark due to external factors like shadows. The user can also move freely through darkness, which makes them very dangerous in dark areas. Black is used by Shihai from Class 1B. Cow allows the user to change their body characteristics to those of a cow. It also grants them the strength of a cow, which doesn't sound all that great. It's used by the pro hero, Cow Lady. One of the absolute coolest transformation quirks is Dragon quirk, which obviously lets the user turn into a dragon. This transformation increases both the user's durability and strength by a lot, and most importantly, it lets them fly. And before you ask, no, unfortunately the quirk doesn't allow you to breathe fire. It's used by the pro hero, Ryukyu. Another more complicated transformation quirk is called Fold-A-Body, and it essentially lets the user make themselves thinner. Using it, the user can make themselves completely flat and fold in different forms. This allows them to pass through narrow spaces and move quickly while remaining undetected. A special move that can be performed using this quirk is called Zenith, and it allows the user to stretch their body to its maximum and enter into another person to heal their organs. Fold-A-Body is used by the pro hero, Edgeshot. Similarly to Fold-A-Body, Playa-Body quirk also allows the user to make themselves thinner. However, this one is much more down to earth, only granting the user enhanced flexibility. It's used by the pro hero, Tiger. There are still 253 quirks left to cover, and one of those is Gyrate, which grants the user the ability to turn their hands into small drills and rotate them at high speeds. They can also rotate pretty much any part of their body like this, which greatly increases the strength of their attacks. Gyrate is used by Sen from Class 1B. Hardening allows the user to harden any part of their body, which protects them from attacks. Despite being an excellent defensive quirk, it can also be used offensively by turning hardened body parts sharp and cutting opponents with them. The only real downside to this quirk is that this hardening can't take too much damage, and at some point it will slowly begin to disappear. It's used by Kirishima from Class 1A. Subscribe quirk allows the user to force others into clicking the subscribe button by hypnotizing them. Don't take your eyes off the screen. Okay, between us, this quirk isn't real, but you can still subscribe. Thanks. Anyway, Lizard Tail Splitter is the quirk that allows the user to split parts of their body and control them telekinetically. The user can split any part of their body, and that part will continue to function normally even if not attached to the rest of the body. For example, the user can split their jaw from their head, move it around, and talk to people through it. However, there's a limit to this, and once it's reached, the split body parts will just stop functioning. It's used by Setsuna from Class 1B. Manifest is probably the most interesting transformational quirk in the series. Instead of allowing the user to transform their body in one specific way, this quirk actually allows them to transform into anything they consume. This only works while the specific food is still in their digestive system. For example, if the user eats takoyaki, which is a Japanese snack that usually is filled with octopus, the user's body will gain octopus properties. The user can even manifest multiple different transformations at the same time depending on the food they ate. The only problem with this is that the user has to eat specific foods every single day in order to use their quirk properly. But still, it's pretty cool. Manifest is used by Tamaki from Class 3A. Meatball quirk allows the user to manipulate human flesh. Using it, the user can manipulate their own flesh in many ways, which allows them to perform many offensive and defensive attacks. However, the main strength of this quirk is the ability to capture enemies with flesh and roll them into meatballs. People who are rolled into meatballs are left completely immobile and disfigured, and they can be trapped like this as long as the user is focused. It's used by 𝐐𝐫𝐻𝐸. Razor Sharp allows the user to produce large blades from their body that are strong enough to cut through metal. It's used by 𝗕𝗲𝗰 from Class 1B. Saber Quirk seemingly does the same thing, but instead of blades, it lets the user transform parts of their bodies into sword appendages. It's used by an unnamed pro hero. However, judging by MHA's creative naming, I'm gonna guess this guy is named Saber. Steel allows the user to turn their skin into steel. This quirk makes the user's body pretty much impenetrable. It's tough enough to protect the user from bullets, blades, as well as other lethal hazards. Obviously, turning into steel also boosts the user's strength, allowing them to break through any obstacle. A downside to this quirk is that steel's durability and strength are directly correlated with how much iron is in the user's diet. So I guess the user has to eat spinach all day in order to use this quirk properly. Steel is used by 𝗕𝗏𝗕𝗏 from Class 1B. Scales allows the user to form hard scales throughout their entire body, which they can use as protective armor or fire them off as projectiles. However, the defense this quirk provides is not really on par with other defensive quirks like hardening or steel. It's used by 𝐴𝐻𝐸 from Class 1B. Shield lets the user create stone-like hexagonal shields from their body that could be utilized both defensively and offensively. It pretty much makes you Captain America. It was used by pro hero Krust. And the last transformation quirk used by a hero is telescopic, which lets the user retract their own body parts into themselves. Despite looking incredibly dumb, it's not that bad as the user can dodge projectiles and attacks this way. It's used by Tatami Nakagame. Okay, some of the quirks so far were really strong, but there are also 17 different transformation quirks used by the villains, so let's cover those now. And once we finish that, I'll reveal which transformation quirk is the strongest one in the entire series. Blade Tooth lets the user grow their teeth and reshape them into sharp blades. They can then control these teeth and use them to trap or attack opponents. Although the strength of teeth is not that bad, they can be shattered easily if hit with enough force. The quirk is used by the villain Moonfish. Bruiser allows the user to power up one of their limbs and then release a powerful attack. The longer the user powers up, the stronger the attack will be. Pretty straightforward quirk, used by the villain 𝗕𝐲𝐻. Crystallize allows the user to completely cover their skin with crystals. These crystals can then be used in combat, however they are not unbreakable. Also, if you're wondering, no, these crystals aren't the real crystals and can't be sold for money. Crystallize is used by 𝐬𝐽 of the 8 Bullets. Hair control lets the user manipulate their hair and use it as a weapon. They can also shoot the strands of their hair like bullets, used by Marshall and Needle. Iron Club quirk lets the user transform both of their arms into iron clubs covered with spikes. For some reason, it also makes the user around 2 feet taller when transformed, which is cool, I guess. It's used by the villain Rougon. Liquefaction allows the user to liquefy the lower half of their body. It's used by Woman Nomu. Longbow quirk allows the user to create a bow by transforming their thumb and pinky finger. With this bow, they can shoot anything they want with full control, and the projectiles seem to be much stronger than when shot with a regular bow. A big downside, however, is that the user can't create arrows, meaning they have to always carry them or the quirk will be useless. It's used by the villain Barrows. Muscle augmentation is a quirk that gives its user the ability to amplify and manipulate their muscle layers, granting them immense strength and durability. Although there are multiple quirks that simply increase the user's physical strength, this one is among the strongest, as it's even strong enough to let the user contend with One For All at 100%, which is no small feat. It was originally used by the villain Muscular, but it was later also used by Hood. And while we're on the topic of Hood, let's quickly cover all other quirks this monster has. Same as a couple of quirks we've covered already, Hood also had a quirk that increases his physical strength. It's simply called Power. Another one is called Super Regeneration, and as the name suggests, this one allows him to heal pretty much any injuries on his body, including missing limbs. Shoulder-mounted jets let Hood manifest jet boosters on his upper back, which grants him flight. It's pretty much a jetpack. Transforming arms allows Hood to shapeshift his arms, allowing him to perform unpredictable long-range attacks. And lastly, Hood also has Storage quirk, which lets him store other creatures within his body and release them at will. Continuing with the list, we have Playtime quirk, which is pretty similar to Gigantification we covered earlier, but it also seems to grant the user an extra set of arms. Used by the villain Mario. Slice allows the user to harden and sharpen their hair. This allows them to use their hair as blades, but they can also use it for defensive purposes as a shield or for parrying attacks. Used by the villain Slice. Transform quirk lets the user shapeshift into another person, completely copying their appearance and voice. In order to do this, the user has to consume that person's blood, and how long they can stay transformed depends on how much blood they've consumed. Although this quirk is already pretty powerful, it's also possible to awaken it. When awakened, this quirk also lets the user copy the person's quirk in addition to their appearance. In order for this to work, however, the user has to have enough prior knowledge about the quirk that they're trying to copy. Pretty dope power, to be honest. It's used by the villain Himiko Toga. But even Toga's quirk is not the best transformation quirk in the series, because that title goes to a quirk way stronger than hers. But before I reveal what quirk is that exactly, let's just briefly cover a couple of quirks that didn't fit in the previous two categories. Tongue Tank allows the user to transform their tongue into a tank cannon and shoot projectiles from it. It's used by that one kid in elementary school. Whole Body Lens allows the user to produce camera lenses everywhere on their body to take pictures. They can also print any pictures they've captured out of their chest whenever they want. I'm gonna be honest, I don't even know why this quirk exists, but it's used by the freelance journalist Taneo. Bristle simply allows the user to harden parts of their hair. Didn't we cover the 3 same ones already? Oh well. This one is used by Tsuyoshi. Now, there are 4 transformation type quirks in the series that haven't been officially named, so let's briefly cover those as well. One of those is Sandstorm, which lets the user turn their upper body into sand, used by pro hero Snatch. The other 3 are all quirks used by various Nomu. One of them allows the user to manifest weapons on their limbs, the other allows the user to sprout gigantic black wings and fly, and the last one allows Nomus to transform their tongues into huge web-like tentacles. There's now only one transformation quirk left to cover, and it's the strongest of them all, Mirio's Permeation. This quirk allows Mirio to phase through all matter. This is one of the hardest quirks to master in the entire series, as it takes extraordinary focus and skill to use properly. Firstly, Mirio has to be careful not to phase through the ground while walking. While phasing through something, he has to be really focused on the exact parts of his body he wants to phase, otherwise he'll just get stuck. Another problem is Mirio's clothes, which will often phase through him when using the quirk, leaving him completely naked. However, even despite all of this, when mastered, this is easily one of the strongest quirks in the entire series and deserves to be called the best transformation quirk. With that covered, we can finally move to the second quirk category, Emitter. This is the largest quirk category by far and contains exactly 154 different quirks. So basically, Emitter quirk allows the user to generate and control certain things or elements. Sometimes they could even allow the user to control whole environments. Same as with the previous category, let's first go through all the heroes who use Emitter quirks, then the villains, and at the end, we'll cover the strongest Emitter quirk in the entire series. The first Emitter quirk on the list is Half Cold, Half Hot quirk, which allows the user to generate fire from one side of their body and ice from the other. It's pretty much 2 different quirks in one, which allows for many different attacks in combat. One downside to this quirk is that the user needs to be constantly regulating their body temperature, meaning that if the user overuses one side of their quirk, it can lead to fatal consequences. It's used by Todoroki from Class 1A. A quirk used by Todoroki's classmate Mina is called Acid, and it allows her to produce acid from her body. Using it, the user can melt solid objects, including metal ones. If the user is skilled enough, they can improve the strength of the acid to the point they can melt pretty much anything. One downside to this quirk is that there's a limit to how much acid the user can produce, and if the user tries to go past that limit, it can lead to some serious consequences. Voice allows the user to communicate with animals. This quirk can come in handy in many situations, like for example commanding birds to scout the area or commanding bugs to perform sneak attacks. One limitation to this quirk is that the user can only command animals in certain ranges, and if there's a loud sound around, the quirk may be disrupted. It's used by Koji from Class 1A. A much simpler quirk than this is called Laser, and it allows the user to shoot lasers from their right eye. It was used by pro hero 𝐿. Shooting lasers from your eyes is cool, but what about shooting lasers from your belly button? Well, this is exactly what Naval Laser allows you to do. The laser created by this quirk is really powerful, so the user has to wear a special belt in order to control it. It's used by Aoyama from Class 1A. Blast quirk is another simple one, and it lets the user rapidly shoot blasts of energy from their palms. A downside to this quirk is that these blasts are extremely bright and can easily blind the user, making them miss their shots. This is why the user must wear quality sunglasses in order to shoot properly. It's used by pro hero 𝐿𝐴. A really terrifying quirk is called Black Hole, and it allows the user to create small black holes from their fingers. Similar to the real black holes, with this ability, the user can disintegrate any matter on the atomic level and can also pull stuff towards them. Although incredibly powerful, this quirk can also be really dangerous, as the user is not immune to the black holes they create and can easily hurt themselves. Black Hole is used by the pro hero 𝐿. Blood control allows the user to control blood that's outside their body. As soon as the blood is in the air, they can freely control it to attack their enemies or capture them. In order to make using this quirk easier, the user can come up with a way to forcibly extract large amounts of blood out of their body, like special gloves or costumes for example. This quirk is used by pro hero 𝐷. Boomerang quirk, as the name suggests, allows the user to control the path of thrown objects. It's a pretty simple quirk and not that strong, as the thrown objects can be easily stopped. It's used by 𝐿𝐵𝐺iro. Brainwashing quirk is an interesting one. This quirk allows the user to control people as long as they verbally respond to something the user says. Once they're in the controlled state, the victim has no control over their actions and has to follow the user's commands. As you probably guessed, a big downside to this quirk is that the user has to trick the victim into responding to them. And if the victim just stays quiet, the quirk will have no effect. It's used by Hitoshi from Class 1C. Bubble quirk simply allows the user to create bubbles. These bubbles can be used in combat to blind enemies, but besides that, it's not all that useful. It's used by pro hero Bubble Girl. Cement quirk allows the user to control cement-based materials by simply touching them. It's important to mention that the user can't create any new cement and can only control the cement in their vicinity. This means that the user's power can vary significantly based on where the fight is taking place. For example, in urban areas, this quirk is extremely powerful, while in the countryside, for example, it's really weak. But the most ridiculous quirk so far has to be the chest hair quirk. Although we don't know anything about it, it presumably enhances the user's masculine traits and grows hair on their chest. It's used by the pro hero, His Purple Highness. Clean Bubbler is another ridiculous quirk that pretty much turns the user into a washing machine. Using it, the user can send streams of soapy water and bubbles from their body in order to attack enemies. These bubbles can also be used to clean and disinfect people's wounds. Clean Bubbler is used by the pro hero, Wash. Clones allows the user to create some kind of substance from their mouth and shape it into clones of themselves. With it, the user can create around 30 clones in total. These clones can then be used to attack enemies, and the user seems to be aware of what each clone is seeing, even if they're a long distance away. It's used by the pro hero, 𝐿𝐵𝐴𝐼𝐒. Cloud lets the user create clouds and use them for flight. This quirk is mostly used for mobility purposes, as it allows the user to easily dodge attacks and go above any obstacle. However, it can also be used in combat to an extent by creating small clouds to block the enemy's vision, or by creating a bunch of clouds and hiding in them. This quirk was used by Oboro. A bit more complicated quirk is Dark Shadow. Basically, this quirk allows the user to summon a shadowy monster from their body. This creature is pretty much like the user's bodyguard, and it will protect the user and follow their commands at all times. Dark Shadow can be active as long as the user has enough energy to maintain it, but it will disappear much quicker if it takes a lot of damage. A big weakness of this quirk is the Dark Shadow can only use its full power in the full darkness, and it's much weaker in bright areas. This quirk is used by Fumikage from Class 1A. Copy is a really useful quirk that allows the user to copy other people's quirks simply by touching them. Depending on how much this ability is trained, the user can potentially hold a bunch of copied quirks within their body. However, they expire after around 5 to 10 minutes from the moment they were copied. It's also important to mention that the user can't activate multiple copied quirks at the same time and has to constantly switch between them. Copy is used by Nato from Class 1B. Creation is a quirk I'm sure all of you are familiar with. It allows the user to create pretty much anything from their body, no matter how complex it is. The only thing they can't create are living beings. This makes the user incredibly versatile, as they can create any item they need in the middle of a battle. One downside to this is that the more complex stuff takes more time to make. This means that the process can be interrupted by the enemy's attacks, giving the user no time to create anything. Creation is used by Momo from Class 1A. Earthflow lets the user manipulate and control all the earth around them. Using this quirk, the user can create big earthquakes and avalanches. However, an obvious weakness of this is that the quirk is pretty much useless if there's no dirt around. Earthflow is used by pro hero Pixie Bob. Electricity generation lets the user generate electricity from their body. The created electricity can later be used as a weapon in the form of lightning bolts fired from the user's hands. This quirk is used by pro hero Electplant. However, a much better electricity-based quirk is electrification, which allows the user to discharge a huge amount of electricity around them. Also, the user gains a defense mechanism that shocks anyone who touches them, leaving them slightly paralyzed. A few downsides to this quirk is that it's only suitable for close-range combat, and if the user exceeds their wattage limit, they'll fry their brain and turn dumb for 1 hour. Electrification is used by Denki from Class 1A. Glamour lets the user produce a special mist from their mouth, which can cause illusions. This ability is mostly used to distract opponents by showing them something that's not true. Other than that, it doesn't have any combat advantages. It's used by Cammy. Erasure is an absolutely overpowered quirk that allows the user to temporarily cancel the quirks of others simply by looking at them. This effect is active as long as the user keeps their eyes open. It's a top-tier support quirk as it renders the target defenseless and open to attacks. It's used by pro hero Eraserhead. The explosion quirk allows the user to sweat nitroglycerin from their hands and ignite it, basically creating explosions. More sweat equals bigger explosions, meaning that the explosions become stronger stronger and stronger the longer the fight lasts due to the user sweating more over time. The only known weakness of this quirk is that during cold weather, the explosions take a bit longer to detonate. It's used by Bakugo from Class 1A. The Fast Fist quirk lets the user move their arms so fast that they become capable of throwing over 100 punches in a second. These punches are so fast that to the naked eye, it seems just like one smooth movement. It's used by pro hero Black Belt. The Fiber Master is another pretty weird quirk. It allows the user to essentially manipulate all types of cloth. This can be used in many unique ways, but the ones we've seen so far are manipulating enemies' clothes in order to restrain them, manipulating allies' clothes in order to move them away from danger, or creating strings out of cloth to trap opponents. It's used by pro hero Best Jeanist. Foresight is an incredibly powerful quirk that allows the user to see the future actions of other people. The user first needs to touch the person they want to see the future of, and then make eye contact with them. When these two things are done, the user will see the target's future actions in the form of visions. Although these visions are apparently impossible to change, Deku proved this wrong when he defied the visions in his battle against Overhaul. This quirk was used by pro hero Sir Night-Eye. Hair Razor lets the user harden part of their hair, tear it off, and use it as a weapon. I mean, you could just come prepared with a real weapon and it would be pretty much the same, but it's cool, I guess. It's used by the pro hero Mr. Brave. Heal quirk lets the user significantly speed up the healing of others, and I mean really speed it up, as some injuries that would take months to heal could be healed in seconds. However, one weird thing is that instead of activating this effect by touching somebody, the user actually has to kiss the person they want to heal, and after the healing is done, the target will be left completely exhausted. This quirk is used by pro hero Recovery Girl. Hellflame is an extremely powerful quirk that allows the user to create and manipulate powerful flames. With it, the user can do anything from generating large fire blasts to covering their body completely in flames. However, due to the incredible power of this quirk, the user has to be careful not to overuse it, as it can increase their body temperature to dangerous levels. If that happens, the user has to rely on others to cool them down. Hellflame is used by pro hero Endeavor. Homing lets the user lock on anyone they can see in 600 meters range. Once the target is locked on, any projectile the user fires will chase the target until it hits it. Although this sounds really powerful, these projectiles don't seem to deal that much damage. This quirk is used by pro hero Snipe. IQ quirk grants the user the ability to temporarily increase their IQ and become a super genius. This can be done either by closing their eyes to think or by drinking tea. I mean, of course we all know that smart people drink tea. This one is used by Psycho from Seiyai Academy. Lockdown lets the user freeze an object in time by touching it. It's kinda useful in some situations, I guess, but definitely not one of the better quirks. It's used by pro hero Rocklock. Magic allows the user to create energy rings that can be used to transport people. It's pretty much just a supportive quirk that helps others travel faster or get them out of bad situations. It's used by pro hero Majestic. Mind Reaper allows the user to force anyone to tell them their darkest secrets or embarrassing things they did. In order for this to work, the user has to touch the target. However, if the target has enough willpower, the quirk may not even work. It's cool for embarrassing your friends, I guess, but useless in combat. It's used by pro hero Odd-Eye. A quirk simply named Mushroom obviously allows the user to spawn mushrooms on any surface they want. Considering this is a long-range quirk, the user has to be extra careful not to accidentally spawn mushrooms on allies' bodies. This is why allies can be sterilized beforehand to avoid this. Mushroom is used by Kinoko from Class 1B. The most broken and most complicated quirk by far has to be the New Order quirk. Put simply, this quirk allows the user to set a condition on anything they touch and say its name. For example, the user can touch another person and say, "You will die if you move," and that will become true. Pretty much any condition the user wants to place on somebody, they can. All they have to do is touch that person and say their name. Pretty broken, I know. Oh, by the way, the user can also put new conditions on non-tangible things like air by saying, for example, "All air around my opponent will disappear." Absolutely mind-blowing quirk. It was used by Star and Stripe, America's #1 hero. The Softening is another pretty powerful quirk that allows the user to turn any solid material into liquid. It's less of a liquid and more of a quicksand texture. Softening can work on very large areas and is perfect against heroes who rely solely on ground for mobility. Also, if the opponent stands on this soft ground, they'll soon start to sink and can only be saved if they have an ability that allows them to propel themselves to safety. It's used by Juzo from Class 1B. A complete opposite to this would be Stiffening quirk, which lets the user harden anything they touch. Although this ability is much weaker than Softening in my opinion, it's not that bad, as the user can make everything really hard and use it as a weapon. It's used by Mr. Smith. Although we never seen the Outburst quirk being used in action, Deku explained to us exactly what it does. Basically, this quirk allows the user to make anyone burst into laughter. This laughter is so intense that the target pretty much loses all of their cognitive abilities and motor skills for a short period. It's used by pro hero 𝗕𝗲𝗄𝐻. Physical enhancement quirk allows the user to increase their physical abilities to some extent, although we don't know by how much. It was used by an unnamed pro hero. Poltergeist lets the user telekinetically control stuff close to them, both humans and objects. Not much else to say about it. It's used by 𝐴𝐾𝐄 from class 1B. Size lets the user change the size of objects they come into contact with. They can make the objects either bigger or smaller, but the quirk doesn't work on living beings. It's used by 𝐸𝐵 from class 1B. Solid air lets the user create walls or platforms from the air using their breath. The walls created by this quirk can be used to defend against enemies. However, they are not very durable as Bakugo easily broke one with a normal punch. It's used by 𝐂𝐫𝐴 from class 1B. Somnambulist allows the user to generate aroma from their skin. When inhaled, this aroma puts the target to sleep. For some reason, this quirk works much better against men, who fall asleep much faster. However, any opponent is at a great disadvantage when fighting the user at close range, as they pretty much need to hold their breath the whole time. It was used by pro hero 𝗕𝗏𝗏. Sugar Rush allows the user to turn the sugar they consume into raw strength. Basically, for every 10 grams of sugar the user eats, their strength will increase 5 times. It sounds really strong, but one downside is that this process also decreases the user's intelligence. So it basically gives you strength but makes you stupid. It's used by Rikidō from class 1A. Telepath grants the user the ability to telepathically communicate with anyone they want. The user can use it in combat to distract their enemy by talking to them, which can leave the enemy confused. However, it can also be used to warn allies about something if they're far away. It's used by the pro hero 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏. Tidal Bore lets the user generate an extremely large stream of water from their mouth. This can then be used to either attack enemies or fly things into the air. It's used by the Singaporean #1 hero, Big Red Dot. Traject allows the user to change the trajectory of anything that passes through their bandages. It's pretty simple. If the user gets attacked by someone or something, they can just change the direction of that attack and save themselves. It's used by the pro hero, 𝗕𝐾𝐫. Twin Impact allows the user to create a second impact in the same place the first impact took place. To simplify it, the user first needs to hit a target with something, then they can activate their quirk and the target will be hit again automatically. This second impact, however, is much stronger than the first one, and it also catches the target completely off guard as they're not expecting it. It's used by Nyirengeki from class 1B. The next quirk on the list is called Vibrate, and this one is revolutionary. It lets the user send vibrations! Wow, who would have guessed what that one does? Anyway, these vibrations are used mostly on the ground to create small earthquakes and disrupt the opponent's footing. It's used by Yoshindo. Voice allows the user to increase the volume of their voice to extreme levels. Using this quirk, the user's voice becomes loud enough to rupture people's eardrums. The loud noise will also cancel out other sound-based quirks, giving the user an advantage against these quirk types in combat. Voice is used by pro hero President Mike. Voyance lets the user see through solid objects and materials. It's a supportive quirk that's great for finding things quickly in large areas. The only things this quirk can't see through are living beings. It's used by pro hero 𝗕𝐿. Wave Motion grants the user the ability to convert their stamina into energy. This energy can then be discharged in the form of golden beams at the opponents. The user can freely choose how much stamina they want to convert into energy. However, converting too much stamina can completely wear out the user. Wave Motion is used by Ninjire from class 3A. Weld is an interesting one, and it allows the user to merge two things together on a subatomic level. In order to activate it, the user has to make contact with two things they want to merge. The quirk works with both living beings and objects. The user is also capable of merging their own body with other things, and the effect can be easily reversed if the user so wishes. Weld is used by Yosetsu from class 1B. Whirlwind lets the user control the air around them and create small tornadoes. Simple, but effective quirk. The only downside is that it's really bad against fire-related quirks, as the high temperature is known to push the air away. Whirlwind is used by Gale Force. And the last emitter type quirk used by a hero is Zero Gravity, which allows the user to remove the effect of gravity from anything they touch. Although this quirk can make pretty much anything float, it doesn't affect living beings, and for solid objects, the limit is around 3 tons. The more objects the user tries to affect at the same time, it's harder for them to keep them afloat, and overusing it can result in feeling sick or even vomiting. It's used by Uraraka from class 1A. Before we reveal which emitter quirk is the strongest one in the series, let's first explain all emitter quirks used by the villains. And trust me, some of these are absolutely insane. Let's kick off the evil side with Airwalk quirk, which allows the user to stand on and control air. It's important to mention that this quirk doesn't allow the user to fly, and instead it allows them to move on invisible air platforms. Since the user of this quirk is not confined to the ground, they have much better mobility and can dodge any attack much easier. One downside to this quirk, however, is that the user needs to stay focused all the time or they will start to fall. Airwalk is used by Kaina. aka Lady Nagant. Another quirk used by Lady Nagant is Rifle, which lets the user pull out and retract a rifle from their right elbow. The user then makes bullets by taking out the strand of their hair and putting them into the rifle through the hole in their hand. And if that's not weird enough for you, she can also manifest a tendril of flesh from her arm that acts as a scope. This rifle is way stronger than the average rifle, and the user can even increase its power output, causing the gun to expand and bulge out. 𝗕𝗲𝗏 allows the user to amplify electricity within their body. Once amplified enough, the user can fire blasts of stored electricity from their hands. A big weakness of this quirk is that the user can't produce the electricity themselves and requires an outside energy source to utilize their power. 𝗕𝗲𝗏 was used by the unnamed commander of the Paranormal Liberation Front. 𝗕thropomorph allows the user to turn objects into puppets that can look like any human the user wants. The user does this using some kind of liquid that appears from their hands. They can then freely control these puppets and even make multiple different ones at the same time. This quirk is used by the villain Skeptic. Barrier allows the user to create a barrier around them. This barrier is like a steel wall and will protect the user from any attack. Although this barrier is pretty sturdy, it's not unbreakable and can be destroyed if enough force is used. Also considering that the only thing this quirk does is create a barrier, it has no offensive capabilities whatsoever. This quirk is used by 𝐿𝐾𝐾, one of the 8 bullets. We already covered a couple of laser-based quirks so far, but here's another one. This one is called Mutant Bovini, and it allows the user to fire off lasers from their face. It's used by the villain Stitched Giant. Blood Curdle allows the user to paralyze anyone by making contact with their blood. The user only needs to touch another person's blood using their tongue, and that person will be immediately paralyzed. The amount the person will be paralyzed for depends on their blood type. B type will be paralyzed for the longest and O type for the shortest. This quirk was used by the hero killer Stain. Blue Flame is the quirk used by Dabi, Endeavor's son, and this one is even stronger than Hellflame. Essentially, this quirk allows Dabi to create flames, but not just any flames. Blue flames, which burn much hotter than the regular ones. Their temperature is confirmed to be at least 2000 degrees Celsius, which is hotter than even lava. Although this quirk is offensively among the strongest in the series, it comes with its share of weaknesses. For example, the user's body is not fit to survive the intense heat created by the quirk, which causes the user's skin to slowly burn over time. Charging muscles allows the user to charge up their strength. This can turn even the user's normal punch into an incredibly powerful blow. It's used by the villain Muscle Man. Compress lets the user shrink down anyone or anything to the size of a marble. The only thing the user has to do to activate this quirk is to touch a thing he wants to shrink with his hand. This overpowered ability lets the user easily kidnap anyone, or immediately end the fight simply by touching the opponent. If the user wants to, they can easily turn anyone back to their normal size simply by wishing it. This quirk is used by the villain Mr. Compress. Confession allows the user to make anyone answer them truthfully. This makes it a really useful quirk, as the user can find out people's weaknesses, true desires, or even their darkest secrets. One weakness of this quirk is that it's really literal, and the user has to be careful how they formulate questions in order to get the answers they need. It's used by Sheen of the 8 bullets. Overhaul quirk allows the user to disassemble and reassemble matter with their hands. With this quirk, the user can do pretty much anything. They can completely destroy or heal people, reshape them into something completely new, or even combine 2 people into one. However, the most ridiculous ability this quirk grants to the user is the ability to merge themselves with other people and use their quirks. The only minor weakness this quirk has is that the user needs to activate it using their hands, meaning if the user's hands are incapacitated, the quirk can't be activated. Overhaul is used by Kai. Decay quirk allows the user to completely destroy anything or anyone they touch with their hand. When a living being is touched by the user, their body will slowly start disintegrating, and the only option at that point is to amputate the decaying body part in order to prevent the spread. This quirk is not natural, and it's actually a reverse-engineered copy of the Overhaul quirk we just covered. However, considering it was modified, it completely lacks the ability to reassemble things, leaving it purely destructive. Decay is used by Shigaraki, and it was given to him by 𝐿_1. Despot quirk allows the user to control other people like puppets using strings that appear from their body. This quirk allows the user to control dozens of people at once, but they can easily break free if they were pushed by someone, or if the user is rendered unconscious. Despot is used by the villain Dictator. Double quirk, as you can probably guess, allows the user to make a copy of anything, both living beings and objects. The user does this by producing dark-colored liquid from their body and creating anything they want with it. However, although the user can technically create anything, they have to know the precise measurements and physical features of the person they're replicating. The interesting thing is that if the user clones themselves, the clones will also have the ability to use the quirk, meaning that in theory, they can just keep creating clones indefinitely. This quirk is used by the villain Twice. Elasticity lets the user make anything they touch elastic. This power can be used in many different ways. Like, for example, turning ground rubbery and using it as a trampoline, or turning crane rubbery and using it as a slingshot. The user can also turn the air elastic in order to change their direction mid-flight. This quirk is used by Gentle Criminal. Electric Charge allows the user to gather and manipulate electricity. After enough electricity is collected, the user can then use it for various attacks and can even jam electrical signals. It's used by the villain 𝗕𝗲. Endurance quirk grants the user the ability to turn morale into strength and endurance. Basically, the more driven the user is to complete a task, the stronger they become. With this quirk, the user's body becomes powerful enough to hold multiple different quirks without losing their mind. It's used by the 𝐕1's bodyguard, 𝗕𝐿𝐵𝐴. In order to be the perfect bodyguard, 𝗕𝐿𝐵𝐴 was actually modified to have 6 more quirks beside this one, so let's quickly cover them now. Energy Saver quirk allows him to survive for a long time without any food, water, or sleep. This allowed 𝗕𝐿𝐵𝐴 to fight for 48 hours straight, and he only needed 3 hours of sleep to recover afterward. Another one is Pain Blocker, which makes 𝗕𝐿𝐵𝐴 unable to feel any pain. This lets him just continue attacking his opponents without being distracted at all by their attacks. The fourth quirk is called Fierce Gains, and it lets him harden his muscles significantly. This makes his body and skin nearly impenetrable. He also has a Gigantification, which allows him to grow in size to around 85 feet. However, he doesn't always have to transform into the greatest size and can choose to grow to any amount he wants. His Mole quirk allows him to transform his fingers into sharp claws, which lets him dig through the ground as a mole. Due to all the previous quirks we mentioned, 𝗕𝐿𝐵𝐴 can easily dig through any material and cause huge environmental damage. And lastly, Dog quirk gives 𝗕𝐿𝐵𝐴 an increased sense of hearing and smell. A copy of this quirk is also used by the pro hero Hound Dog. The quirk seems really accurate, as it even allowed the Hound Dog to sense exactly how many people are in the forest from the outside. Back to covering other characters, we have Energy Suck, which allows the user to absorb the vitality and stamina of others. The user does this by making physical contact with the target and then inhaling their vitality. This process makes them stronger and also increases them in size. It's used by 𝗕𝗲𝗄, one of the 8 bullets. Firecracker lets the user rip off chunks of their hair and explode them like firecrackers. It's similar to Bakugo's explosion quirk in a sense, but much weaker. It's used by the bomb villain. Ice Ply allows the user to freely manipulate any nearby ice. They can freely gather, move, attack, and defend with the ice they control. However, the reason why this quirk is much stronger than others is because its power extends to the size of an entire town. It's used by the villain 𝗕𝗏. 𝐂𝐫𝐴 grants the user the ability to create strong wind around them, which can deflect pretty much anything. However, a major weakness of this quirk is that this windshield doesn't protect the user's head, leaving it as a weak point. It's used by the villain 𝐵𝐴. Gas quirk allows the user to generate a poisonous sleep gas from their body. Anyone who ingests it will immediately fall asleep and will stay that way until treated. Another interesting thing is that the user can sense the movements of anyone inside the gas. An obvious weakness, however, is that this ability can pretty much be nullified using a regular gas mask. It's used by the villain 𝗕𝗏𝗡. Reflect lets the user send the opponent's attacks back at them. This quirk is always active and cannot be turned off, meaning that anyone who touches the user will be harmed, even allies. Although it seems unbeatable, Reflect can be overloaded if hit repeatedly with incredible force in a short amount of time, which will cause it to stop working. It's used by Flex Turn, but Shigaraki also seems to have a version of this quirk in his arsenal. Okay, the Incite is a weird one. It allows the user to enhance the powers of others using their voice. However, the problem is that this quirk only works on people who see the user as a great leader. So basically, if you're a follower of the user, your strength will be increased, and if you're just a random person, it won't. It's used by the villain Trumpet. Another really interesting quirk is the Love quirk, which allows the user to empower the person they love the most by confessing their true feelings. The more intense the love, the more power the target gets. A downside to this quirk is that this effect can only be activated once a day. It's used by 𝗕𝗏𝗏. Iron Ball quirk allows the user to create iron balls from their knuckles and throw them at opponents. This can range from egg-sized balls to giant balls bigger than the user themselves. It's used by the villain 𝗕𝗏𝗏. Landmine lets the user turn anything they touch into an explosive that they can later detonate. These explosives don't seem to be that strong, but can be pretty powerful if multiple ones are used at the same time. This quirk is used by the villain 𝗕𝗏𝗄s. Larceny grants the user the ability to take anything they want from the opponent's hands. This is pretty useful against anyone using weapons, as you can just take it from them. It's used by 𝗕𝗏𝗄, one of the 8 bullets. Leafipulation allows the user to manipulate leaves and shoot them as projectiles. This quirk doesn't look to be that strong considering that regular shields seem to be enough to stop the attacks. It's used by an unnamed Yakuza thug. Every shonen anime has to have a magnet-based user, but MHA does it a bit differently. Magnetism quirk lets the user magnetize anyone in close proximity. The females are polarized north and the males are polarized south. This means that males and females will constantly attract each other, while the same sexes will repel each other. This pretty weird quirk is used by the villain villain Magne. Metal manipulation does exactly what you think it does, allowing the user to manipulate metal by touching it. The user can freely transform any metal objects around him and use them for various offensive and defensive attacks. However, same as with the other quirks of this type, if there's no metal around, it becomes useless. It's used by the villain 𝗲𝗲. Mimicry lets the user transform their mind into solid objects and use those objects as their real body. Normally, the user can only enter the objects around their own size. However, if the quirk is amplified by drugs, the user becomes able to manipulate the entire location. The only known weakness of this quirk is that the user has to occasionally peek out from the object to see what's going on, which leaves them open to attacks. It's used by the villain Mimic. Muddied lets the user cause minor amnesia in targets by touching their heads. After this, the target's memories of the last 5 minutes and the next 5 minutes becomes fuzzy. It's used by the villain 𝐕𝐸. A bit more complicated quirk is the mummification. This quirk allows the user to control the bandages that they're wrapped in. These bandages can then be used to capture random objects and turn them into mummy soldiers, which the user can control. A couple of weaknesses to this quirk is that the user can't capture living beings, and if the bandages are broken, the user will lose control of everything he has captured. Mummification is used by the villain 𝗲𝗲. For some reason, there's another quirk that revolves around uncontrolled laughter similar to the outburst we covered earlier. This one is called �smile, and it activates by the user showing their teeth to the target. This will make the target uncontrollably laugh for 2 full hours, which greatly impacts their ability to fight properly. It's used by the villain Mr. Smiley. Rupture allows the user to detonate parts of their own body. It's one of the quirks used by Woman Nomu. Sloshed quirk makes anyone who comes close to the user lose their balance and become dizzy. The user can choose if the person will become dizzy or not, meaning they can choose not to affect their allies when they're around them. Sloshed is used by one of the 8 bullets, 𝐷𝐸𝗷. Strong arm allows the user to rotate their shoulders at extreme speeds, which in turn makes their attacks much stronger than usual. It's used by the Rapper, one of the 8 bullets. Sword Kill quirk allows the user to create flexible swords from their arms and shoulders, and yeah, that's pretty much it. It's used by the Serpenter's brothers. One of the best emitter quirks is called Warp Gate, and it lets the user create and manipulate portals. These portals can transport anything they come into contact with to a nearby location, which makes it great for retreating or surprise attacks. However, if the portal is closed while the person is midway through it, that person will be cut in half. Warp Gate is actually an artificial quirk and is the fusion of a couple of different quirks. It's used by the villain 𝗲𝗄𝐻. Water control allows the user to control and manipulate water. With it, the user can execute a plethora of water-based attacks, such as forming water into sharp claws or sending powerful torrents of water towards their opponents. It's used by the villain Hanzo. Weather manipulation allows the user to freely manipulate weather. This quirk is really powerful and it can create anything from large storm clouds to giant tornadoes. The user is also able to manipulate wind and pretty much fly using it. However, this great quirk comes at a cost. You see, each time the user activates it, an enormous burden is put on their body, which can easily cause them to faint or even die. That's why this quirk must be used carefully and sparingly. Weather manipulation was used by 𝗏. 𝗏 also had a couple of more quirks in his arsenal that he acquired using a copy of All for One quirk, so here's a brief list of them as well. Air Wall lets the user create circular shields made of compressed air. The shields are incredibly durable, able to protect 𝗏 from Deku's strongest attacks. Scanning lets 𝗏 scan people in order to get some information about their quirks and power levels. Hydra allows 𝗏 to summon a huge Hydra monster from his back and control it. And lastly, Bullet Laser lets 𝗏 fire purple lasers from his fingertips. White Line allows the user to control lane lines painted on the road. They can then use those lines as weapons. I really don't know how anyone even came up with a stupid quirk like this, but it exists. It's used by the villain Ending. Pretty convenient since this is the ending of this segment. Now before we cover the strongest emitter quirk in the series, let's first quickly go through a couple of emitter quirks that didn't fit in any of the 2 previous categories. These are either quirks used by civilians or the yet unnamed quirks. First, we have Acid Sweat. This one's really similar to Mina's acid quirk, but instead of releasing large quantities of acid at once, the user can only release it gradually, like sweat. This acid also has explosive properties, and the user can create small explosions by rubbing their hands. This quirk is used by Bakugo's father, Masaru. Banging Ball allows the user to create small balls with mouths from their body. These balls can then be used offensively as projectiles and are even capable of ingesting certain materials. This quirk is used by Tamashiro from Masagaki Primary School. Assault Dust quirk is pretty simple, and it allows the user to generate and manipulate dust. As we've seen in this one scene, this quirk can be used offensively to shoot dust towards people. Besides this, we don't know anything else about it. Assault Dust is used by one of the unnamed students from Masagaki Primary School. Other students from this school have quirks as well, like, for example, Electromagnetic Bullets, which lets the user create an electromagnetic field around them and shoot anything they have in their hands with great force. Another one is Hula Hoop, which is quite fit for an elementary school student, and it allows the user to create hoops of energy that can be thrown at enemies. King Slam allows the user to take a large hammer out of nowhere and use it to attack enemies. Queen Beam allows the user to fire a beam of energy from their face. How imaginative, I know. And Viral Cosmos lets the user create a bunch of flower petals and use them to attack their enemies. Back to quirks not used by elementary schoolers, we have Frost, which lets the user create and control ice. It's pretty simple, but can be a pretty powerful ability. Besides using ice to attack their opponents, the user can also coat themselves in the layer of ice in order to sustain more damage. This was originally the quirk of Todoroki's mother, Rei, but her children Natsuo and Fuyumi also have it. Cell activation allows the user to activate cells in theirs or another person's body. This increases regeneration and can improve the physical condition of that person. It's a pretty powerful support quirk, and the only downside is that this process takes a toll on the user's body and can cause fatigue if used too many times. It's used by 𝐂𝐿𝐴. Poison gas generates gas inside the user's body, whether the user wants to or not. If the user tries to keep this gas inside themselves, they'll start to feel sick and they'll have to release it at some point. Whoever else inhales this gas will also start feeling sick. It's used by Takeshi Bushijima. Hologram quirk allows the user to create holograms of anything they wish. They can even create extremely large stuff hundreds of meters tall. Even though it's useless in battle, it can be great to scare the opponents or pull pranks, I guess? It's used by Mahoro. Despite sounding strong, the Soul quirk is actually a bizarre one. This quirk manifests itself as a pink bird, and it's always active. This bird will always say how the user truly feels inside, making the user unable to lie or hide their true feelings. It works something like this. I really don't want anyone to subscribe to the channel right now. He's lying, he actually wants you guys to subscribe more than anything else. Hit it right now, thanks. Anyway, this quirk is used by Rody Soul. Another quirk that sounds strong but actually isn't is Water Gun. This one simply allows the user to shoot a weak stream of water from their hands. Although it's useless in combat, it's still a pretty good quirk for a hero as they can put out fires. It's used by Kota. One of the unnamed emitter quirks is the quirk of Deku's dad, Hisashi, who apparently has a quirk that lets him breathe fire, although we've never seen it in the show. Another one is the quirk of Deku's mother, Inko, which simply allows her to attract small objects using telekinesis. The last two unnamed emitter quirks are Paralysis, which lets the user paralyze someone's muscles for 3 seconds by looking at their eyes, used by 𝐿𝐵𝐾𝐲, and the quirk that lets the user control and manipulate glass, used by Star Servant. And finally, let's cover the strongest emitter quirk on the list, All for One. All for One is one of the most powerful quirks in the entire series, as it allows the user to steal quirks from anyone they touch. These quirks can later be used by the user or even transferred to others. This pretty much means that the user can wield a bunch of quirks at once and have a quirk prepared for any situation. The victims of All for One are left quirkless and unable to ever retrieve their powers. This quirk was used by All for One, but was later transferred to Shigaraki. Throughout the years, All for One has stolen many powerful quirks, so let's quickly go through them now. Spoiler alert, it won't be that quick since this guy has stolen a lot of quirks. Anyway, Air Cannon grants AFO the ability to release devastating shockwaves from his palms. Despite being an incredibly powerful offensive quirk, it can also be used defensively, as the user can blow away attacks sent their way. Force quirk activation is another quirk stolen by All for One. As the name suggests, it allows him to forcibly activate the quirks of others in any situation. This ability also works on unconscious people, meaning that All for One can activate the quirks of his allies even though they've been defeated. Brawn Boost is probably the most straightforward quirk on this list. It simply allows AFO to boost his physical strength. Dark Ball allows him to create a bunch of balls emitting dark energy matter and use them in combat. Although we don't know much about this one, it looks really destructive. Hard Flame Fan grants AFO the ability to create a wall of fire around himself as a defensive shield. Although the shield's pretty durable, it can't protect the user from attacks hotter than itself. This is why attacks like Endeavor's Flames, for example, can easily pass through. Heavy Payload is another quirk that simply increases the strength of AFO's attacks. It's especially powerful when the user has multiple quirks, as they can use it to enhance the power of all other quirks they have. Impact Recoil allows the user to reverse the impact caused by the opponent's attack. This means that the force of the attack will be sent back to the attacker. However, this only works against regular physical attacks and cannot counter other forms of attack like fire from Endeavor's quirk, for example. Impure Beam allows the user to unleash a large and destructive beam of light. This quirk is one of the strongest in All for One's arsenal, capable of causing widespread damage in a single shot. A huge weakness of this quirk is that it's just too powerful, and if used to its maximum potential, it'll completely blow up the user's body. Infrared lets AFO sense his surroundings using infrared senses. This quirk is perfect for AFO as it helps compensate for his blindness. Kinetic Booster is another quirk that just straight up makes All for One's attacks stronger by increasing his kinetic energy. Apparently, he has 4 copies of this quirk, which makes its effects way stronger. Radio wave allows him to send powerful electromagnetic pulses. These pulses can disrupt any electrical appliances and also cause communicators to malfunction. Another pretty solid quirk in 𝐿4𝐿's arsenal is that it allows him to cut communications between heroes and make them unable to call for backup. Rivet Stab lets AFO create black and red tendrils from his fingers. These tendrils are really strong, able to pierce through powerful fighters such as Endeavor and Bakugo. Scatter is used to multiply any projectile the user is firing. For example, when Shigaraki caught a fighter jet's laser strike, he split it into 10 different lasers and sent it back at jets. Although we don't know for sure, this quirk seems pretty useless unless you already have some projectiles to fire. Okay, so far all of AFO's quirks have been combat-based, so let's cover a different one now. Search is a quirk that allows 𝐿4𝐿 to observe up to 100 people at a time. He can see the precise locations of people he observes and also get some information about their weak points. Another one of AFO's non-combat quirks is called Warping, and it allows him to create black smoke from someone's mouth. This smoke will then completely envelop the target and transport them to a close-by location. One downside to this quirk is that the user requires a person he's familiar with at the other location to serve as an anchor. Also, if the target's willpower is strong enough, they can completely resist the quirk's effects. Antigen quirk simply allows 𝐿4𝐿 to change his blood type, which can come in handy against certain quirks, I guess. Another blood-related quirk in AFO's arsenal is Bloodlet, which lets him shoot blood from his body and later absorb it. Using Hypertrophy, 𝐿4𝐿 can enlarge his arm at will and make it stronger, and using Multiplier, he can grow multiple arms from his body. One of AFO's quirks we know nothing about is Rivet, which seemingly allows him to generate rivet-like growths from his arm. What these are used for, I don't know. Spear-like Bones allows 𝐿4𝐿 to generate spears made out of bones from his body. He used it here with like 100 different quirks. He actually stole this one from his own mother. And finally, the last quirk used by 𝐿4𝐿 is Spring-like Limbs, which lets him store and release energy by coiling his muscles like springs. He usually uses it to increase the power of his air cannon quirk. Okay, that was a lot of emitter quirks, 154 to be exact. However, now we can finally move to the third quirk category, Mutant, and there are some really weird quirks in this one. Contrary to transformation quirks, mutant quirks are abilities that cause the user a permanent abnormality. Pretty much imagine regular transformation quirks, but the user can never turn back to normal humans and is always transformed. Same as with other categories, we'll cover heroes, then villains, and then the strongest mutant quirk. So let's start. The first mutant quirk on the list is Vines, which grants the user controllable thorny vines in place of regular hair. Vines is used by Ibarra from Class 1B. Blazing Hair allows the user to freely control the flames on their head. This user can shoot strands of hair like fireballs or use them as weapons. It's used by the pro hero, Burnin. Yet another hair-related quirk is Extend-A-Hair. This one lets the user manipulate the growth and movements of their hair. However, what makes this one a bit different from the rest is that it seems to allow the user to control all hair on their body and not just the hair on their head, which makes it at least a bit better, I guess. It's used by Nagamasa Mora. Samadyne allows the user to spray glue from their holes in their head. Once the glue hits something, it'll either harden and trap whatever it makes contact with, or make it sticky and dangerous to touch. It's used by Kojiro from Class 1B. Dupla Arms grants the user a set of arm-like tentacles that can transform into duplicates of their other body parts. Any part of the body the user chooses to duplicate will pretty much be an enhanced version of the original one, which can improve strength and various senses. If any of these additional body parts are cut off, it's not a big deal as the user can replicate it again once the injury is healed. Used by Mezzo from Class 1A. Earphone Jack grants its user long, controllable earlobes that work like headphone cables. It's pretty weird, I know, but it can be used to catch faint sounds through extremely thick walls, making the user excellent at scouting work. Besides this, these cables can also be used in combat as they're powerful enough to break through thick materials, or they can simply be used to connect to the phone like normal headphones. It's used by Kyoka from Class 1A. Another quirk good for scouting is Good Ear, which allows the user to hear high frequencies that humans normally can't. It can also be used to detect the number of people nearby. It's used by the pro hero, Sirius. Engine creates small engine holes around the user's body, which allows them to move at extraordinary speeds. People using this quirk are perfect for reaching far destinations really quickly or following fast targets like vehicles. If the user needs even greater speed, they can choose to remove mufflers from the engines, which will significantly increase the proficiency of the quirk. This process is not easy, however, as the user has to forcibly remove them, which is quite painful. An interesting thing about this quirk is that it requires fuel in order to work properly, similar to an actual vehicle. Engine is used by 𝗕𝗲𝗬𝐷𝗲 from Class 1A and his older brother 𝗕𝐶. Frog grants the user the characteristics of the frog, which includes great leg strength, wall clinging, a powerful tongue, and even creating mucus with various effects. However, as frogs are cold-blooded creatures, the user is highly sensitive to cold, with prolonged exposure preventing the quirk from being used properly. Frog is used by 𝗬𝗎 from Class 1A. Gatling grants the user gun-like organs in their arms, from which they can shoot bullets. Pretty simple one, used by the pro hero Gunhead. High Specs grants the user unparalleled intelligence and perception that far surpasses that of any human. Due to this, the user is capable of instantly formulating complicated strategies and being an incredibly good leader in general. It's used by Nezu, the principal of UA High School. Horn Cannon, as the name suggests, allows the user to detach and launch their horns as projectiles. Immediately after launching the horns, the new set is created on the user's head, meaning that they can fire multiple horns in quick succession. Used by Pony from Class 1B. Invisibility grants the user a completely invisible body. However, this effect doesn't extend to clothing or objects. This means that the user needs to constantly strip off their clothes in order for the quirk to be useful. However, going fully naked greatly exposes the user's skin to the elements, and therefore their body may be affected by extreme temperatures. It's used by Toru from Class 1A. Similarly to Engine, Jet grants the user the ability to expel air from open holes on their feet. This allows them to fly around and move faster than the 𝐿𝐾𝐵, which is great for both offensive and defensive maneuvers. However, the air used to power this quirk is taken directly from the user's lungs, meaning that its strength is limited to how much air the user has. Jet is used by the retired pro hero Gran Torino. Papyrus is yet another quirk that makes the user extremely thin. It basically flattens the user's body like papyrus, which is pretty much an ancient paper. It doesn't have any other special abilities, but it's pretty fun to watch it in action. It's used by the Egyptian top hero, Selam. Orcanus gives the user orca-related abilities and lets them do anything the real orca can, even on land. Among other things, this quirk allows the user to produce hypersonic waves that can paralyze targets instantly. Due to the whale's natural properties, the user is extremely vulnerable to heat and dehydration. Used by the pro hero, Gang Orca. Another quirk that turns you into a sea animal is Spotted Seal, which grants the user the abilities of a seal. This includes the ability to hold their breath for a long time, dive as deep as 1500 meters, and even use echolocation underwater. Used by pro hero 𝐿𝐾𝐿. One of the weirdest mutant quirks is definitely Pop-Off, which allows the user to produce sticky spheres from their head and use them in combat. Once the sphere is removed, another one will grow instantly. An interesting thing is that the stickiness of the spheres directly corresponds to the user's health and can last up to a day if they're in good condition. Also, if the user removes too many spheres from their head in quick succession, they'll begin to bleed. Pop-Off is used by Mineta from Class 1A. But an even weirder one has to be Serpentress quirk. This quirk grants the user a trio of living snakes as part of their hair. These snakes have excellent senses, which the user can utilize in order to locate hidden enemies as well as missing disaster victims. Used by the pro hero, 𝗬𝗲. Rabbit gives the user rabbit-like properties. The most important ability this quirk provides is immense leg strength. Through it, the user can move around by bouncing an attack by stomping or kicking. Not strong in theory, Mirko has shown incredible proficiency with it, even becoming Japan's 5th best ranked hero. Tail quirk grants the user a strong and bulky tail that they can use in combat. Used by Ojiro from Class 1A. Tape allows the user to eject sticky tape from openings located on both of their elbows. The amount of tape the user is able to generate in a single instance isn't unlimited, but it's still a lot of damn tape, which makes the quirk surprisingly versatile. Used by Seto from Class 1A. Toho gives the user beast-like appearance and also makes them very large. The user of this quirk is called Godzilla. I think you can make your own connections as to what this quirk is referencing. Water Pump allows the user to create water from the hoses they have in place of hands. This quirk is best utilized to extinguish fires and is not the best quirk for combat. Used by the pro hero, Backdraft. Zoom lets the user zoom their vision, allowing them to clearly see distant people and objects up to 5 kilometers away. It's used by Mei from Class 1H. And the most creative quirk so far has to be the comic quirk, which allows the user to use onomatopoeia, which are basically words that are used to mimic a sound to create certain effects. For example, the user can say kaboom, bang, blam, bonk to create huge letters that crash through the area. They can also say something like boing to create bouncy letters. This pretty creative quirk is used by Comic Man from Class 1B. The 4 mutant quirks used by heroes are Centipede, Eagle, Flying Squirrel, and Lion. There's really not much to say about these ones, they just turn the user into the animal they're named after. Before I reveal the strongest mutant quirk in the entire series, let's first go through the mutant villains. A quirk that absolutely didn't need to exist is Trap Flex, which allows the user to flex their trapezius muscle to extreme degrees. And in case you're wondering, this is not the hair, it's his flexed shoulders. It's used by the villain Habit Headgear. Bullhead, in addition to granting the user horns, also makes them look like a Minotaurus, and this is also the name of the guy who uses it. Body Morph is another simple quirk that grants the user an extra pair of arms along with increased strength, used by the villain Steel Bulwark. Chameleon quirk, despite changing the user's appearance to that of a chameleon, also allows them to stick and climb on walls and stretch out their long tongue. The user can also camouflage their entire body, which can be used to evade opponents. However, this camouflage is not perfect, as the user can still be spotted by keen-eyed individuals. Used by the villain Invisible Wall. 𝗕𝐿 grants the user the characteristics of various animals and allows the user to grow to monstrous proportions. The main and permanent form of this quirk, however, seems to be a blue werewolf. Using this quirk, the user can gain the characteristics of birds, lizards, and even dragons, which allows him to expel fire from their mouth. It's used by the villain 𝗕𝐿. Chronostasis pretty much turns the user's hair into claw cans that can extend and attack others. People who get hit by these claw cans will get slowed down. A big problem with this is that this quirk can't be used if the user is moving, and they need to remain motionless in order for it to work. Used by a Yakuza member, 𝗕𝗲𝗄. Quad arms and extra arms are the two quirks that do the exact same thing and grant the user an extra set of arms. Used by the pro hero 4th Kind and the villain 4-Armed Zealot. Food allows the user to bite, chew, and digest anything that they're able to come into direct contact with. Although the user can eat pretty much anything without any problems, this is not true for toxic substances like poisons, and the user will get severely sick if they eat it. It's used by 𝗲𝗏, one of the 8 bullets. Gecko grants the user a reptilian appearance and the ability to cling to walls and other surfaces like a lizard. This quirk is used by the villain Spinner. Two more quirks used by Spinner are Body Bulk, which lets him bulk up, increasing his body size, and Scale Mail, which allows him to cover his whole body with sharp armored scales. Life Force allows the user to double their lifespan, causing them to age at a slower rate. However, this quirk comes at the cost of sacrificing physical mobility. It's used by both Dr. Tsubasa and All for One. Plant turns parts of the user's body into plants. These plants apparently have the ability to heal other people. Used by the villain 𝐶HOMPER. Shock Absorption gives the user the ability to reduce the effectiveness of physical blows by absorbing the shocks produced by them. However, it's important to mention that this quirk doesn't completely nullify the damage, and there's a limit to how much damage the user can withstand. It's used by USJ Nomu. Curse turns the user's entire body into paper runes, and also makes their body extremely light. The paper can be launched as sharp strands towards their foes. The user can also create clones of themselves using their paper. Used by the villain 1000 Eyes. And lastly, Octopus turns the user into an octopus. Used by the villain Innsmouth. There's also a couple of mutant quirks used by regular civilians like Big Horn, for example, which grants the user 2 horns on their head, and that's really it. Used by a newscaster, Daikaku. Glycerin allows the user to produce a smooth liquid from their skin. This liquid has moisturizing effects which help the user maintain a youthful appearance. It's used by Bakugo's mom, Mitsuki. Squirmy Fingers allows the user to precisely and flawlessly control their fingers. This can potentially be useful for a lot of different things, but the user of this quirk, David Shield, is using it mostly to create amazing hero costumes. The only unnamed mutant type quirk in this entire series is the one used by Sludge Villain, which allows him to transform his body into a mud-like substance. And finally, let's finish this section off by covering the strongest mutant type quirk in the entire series, which is Fierce Wings used by the pro hero Hawks. This quirk grants Hawks a pair of large red wings made up of a bunch of feathers, and it has made Hawks one of the fastest fighters in the entire world. However, instead of just using these wings for flight and combat, the user can actually control every feather separately using their mind. Each feather can be detached and used to perform a certain task. For example, the user can detach a bunch of feathers at the same time and send them to save people from danger. Each individual feather also acts as a sensor that can feel people and objects around it. One downside to this quirk is that if the user detaches a lot of feathers at the same time, their flying capabilities will worsen and limit their mobility. The only category left to cover now are accumulation quirks. Accumulation type quirks are powers that, in order to function properly, require the user to accumulate something ahead of time, such as power, energy, mass, or a particular resource. There are only 5 of these quirks in total, and the last quirk in this category is not only the strongest accumulation quirk, but the strongest quirk in the entire series. The first one in this segment is Fat Absorption quirk. This quirk allows the user to use their fat to absorb damage and later release it towards enemies. It's capable of absorbing a huge amount of damage and can even be used to restrain enemies by trapping their hands inside the fat. However, this quirk doesn't make the user fat by itself, meaning that the user has to eat ridiculous amounts of food every day in order to use the quirk to its full potential. It's used by the pro hero, Fat Gum. The only accumulation type quirk used by a villain is Stress, which grants the user the ability to convert stress, anger, and frustration into raw power. Whenever the user's power increases this way, it also makes them grow in size. This quirk has the potential to make the user unimaginably strong, much stronger than most of the other quirks. However, a downside to it is that positive emotions like peace or relief will have a negative effect and decrease the user's power. It's used by the villain Redestro. Similarly to Stress, Shame quirk allows the user to become more powerful as he gets more embarrassed. It's a pretty unique one, to be honest. The user of this quirk can get extremely powerful really quickly by doing something stupid, like removing all of their clothes in public. This will make them really embarrassed, which will in turn grow their strength. It's used by 𝗕𝗲𝗄 𝗲𝐻𝐼𝐴. The Rewind quirk is a terrifying one. It essentially allows the user to reverse anyone's body to its previous state. On a small scale, this can be used to heal people's injuries by reversing them back to how they were before getting injured. However, it can be used for so much more than that. This quirk is so powerful that it can even revert people back to the time they weren't even born, pretty much deleting them from existence. It's definitely among the strongest quirks in the series, and it's used by Eddie. And finally, the quirk you've all been waiting for, the strongest accumulation quirk and the strongest quirk in the entire series overall, One for All. One for All is not a natural quirk, and it was created accidentally by All for One, who merged the two quirks together. The first one is the quirk Bestowal, which simply allows the user to transfer their quirk to others. However, considering that it doesn't do anything else, even if the quirk gets transferred to someone else, that person will not gain any new abilities. The other quirk is Power Stockpiling quirk, which allows the user to gradually get stronger over time. Individually, both of these aren't that strong, but when combined, they get insanely powerful. To better explain it, imagine this. The stockpiling quirk allows you to become pretty strong throughout your life. Then, when you're about to die, you just transfer the quirk to someone else. Now, that other person will continue getting stronger. Repeat that process a few times and the power this quirk gives you becomes insane. But like that's not strong enough, One for All also lets the current user access the quirks of all the past users. It was originally used by All for One's brother, Yoichi, but throughout the years it was transferred to 8 different people. So now let's quickly explain all the quirks One for All is made out of. Let's start with Black Whip, which allows the user to produce energy whips from their body and control them. This quirk can be used in many different situations. For example, the user can use it to move quickly by grabbing onto objects like Spider-Man, capture enemies, or even create whips inside their bodies to reinforce their muscles. Interestingly, this quirk seems to get stronger the angrier the user is. However, if the user completely loses control of their emotions, they won't be able to control it properly. Black Whip was originally used by Daigoro, the 5th user of One for All. Next up is Danger Sense, a quirk that allows the user to sense all incoming attacks. It's pretty much like a sixth sense, and the user will get a sharp stabbing sensation in their head whenever they're in danger. Although this quirk is amazing for combat, it can't protect the user from everything, and if the attack is fast enough, the user won't be able to react in time. Danger Sense was originally used by Hikage, the 4th user of One for All. Year Shift is the quirk of another previous One for All user, Kudo. This quirk essentially allows the user to change the speed of anything. Since the quirk was merged with One for All, its power was greatly increased, to the point that Deku managed to enhance his attack so much that they broke the sound barrier. A downside to this is that the quirk shouldn't be used for longer than 5 minutes, as it can put enormous strain on the user's body. Fajin allows the user to build up energy by performing repetitive movements and storing it for later use. To better explain it, the user can just quickly crouch and stand up a bunch of times in order to build up energy. When the user chooses to release all that built up energy, they gain a significant boost in strength and speed for a period of time. Fajin was used by Bruce, the 3rd user of One for All. Without a doubt, the simplest One for All quirk is Float, which allows the user to fly. Yep, that's pretty much it. It was used by Nanashimura, the 7th user of One for All. Smoke Screen allows the user to create a thick cloud of purple smoke from their body. This quirk has no offensive potential and is mostly used tactically to obscure the opponent's vision. It's weak by itself, but a pretty good addition to One for All's arsenal. And there you go, guys! All 261 quirks in My Hero Academia explained. However, if you're still craving more MHA content, you could check this video next where I explained all of Deku's different forms in the show. Go ahead, click it.